Hi there, welcome to the channel. Today, I'm gonna be talking about the chapter called Discriminant. It is also commonly taught or learned in school as the nature of roots. So, I won't be able to cover the whole chapter in one video as I don't like my videos to be too long. So instead, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna break the chapter out into a few parts so that it's more digestible that way. So here's part 1 of the discriminant. At this point, you might be wondering, who am I? As this is the first video of the channel, let me just do a brief introduction first. So I've been a math tutor for more than 5 years now, and I specialize in O-level A math, so mostly at the Sec 3 and Sec 4 level. My students love the way I teach because I make concepts simple to understand. In fact, they are the ones who suggested for me to start this YouTube channel so that they can learn math in between watching other YouTube videos and perhaps use this as a justification to their parents why they are on YouTube in the first place. So that's how this channel came to be, and I'm just testing out to see if this could be a good way to teach, right? So apologies in advance if the video is not as professional as the videos that you usually watch on YouTube by other YouTubers and stuff like that. But if you do like the idea of this, or if you found the video beneficial, please do all the things that typically other channels or YouTubers will ask you to do, right? So without further ado, these are the various sections of the video, and you can use the timestamp given in the description box to navigate through the video. So for those of you who are rewatching this, you can just jump to the various sections that you are interested in. Now, let me begin first by saying that discriminant can be quite a challenging topic to students because it's one of those topics that just a surface level understanding of the concepts in the chapter is often not enough. Hence, instead of straightaway teaching the concepts in the chapter, mainly the 3 scenarios, I usually teach this chapter in tuition by starting with concepts that you have already learned in the lower secondary level. So, if you have already learned of this chapter in school, the 3 scenarios here should ring a bell. If not, it's alright. If you have not learned of this chapter or if the 3 scenarios seem a bit foreign to you, there's no need to worry about it, as after establishing the links to the lower secondary concepts, I'll be teaching and elaborating on these 3 scenarios. So, what are the lower secondary topics or concepts that are relevant to discriminant? Well, that's your answer right there. For those of you who are puzzled and are thinking, what has quadratic equations got to do with discriminant, right? Hold that thought first. Let's talk about quadratic equations and you will understand that in a bit. So when I say quadratic equations here, I'm not talking about the various mathematical techniques that you have learned in school to solve quadratic equations. Your technique of moving everything to one side, pressing the calculator, or using the formula negative b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a to solve, or even completing the square. What I'm talking about here is the fundamental concept of quadratic equations. So things like when you solve quadratic equation, what is it that you are really solving? Why is that the answer? And why must you move everything in the equation to one side, right? Usually the left. You see, a lot of times math taught in the secondary school, be it at the lower secondary or the upper secondary level, it does not focus on the fundamental concepts and are heavily focused on implementation instead. Meaning to say that you are usually taught how to use a particular mathematical technique and the steps to take when you encounter a particular question or questions from a chapter. Rarely, as a student, you are taught the fundamental concept of why certain techniques or steps are being used. As a result, you often find yourself lost, when the question type changes, or when a teacher set a question that requires more than just a surface level understanding. Right, those questions that link a few different chapters together, that are usually given to you at a prelim exams or the end of year exams, right? This is especially so for O-level students, because the O-level people love to weave different concepts together to see if, as a student, you've really understood what's taught at the secondary level as a whole. This is the reason why when I teach in my tuition or even through these videos, I'll be establishing links between various concepts learned in secondary school, so that as a student, you can see how different mathematical concepts and chapters come together to form the bigger picture. And for the case of discriminant, a strong understanding of quadratic equations at a fundamental level is required. So let me connect the dots for you. Here's how a typical quadratic curve will look like. This is your happy face, and this is your sad face curve. For illustration purposes, let's just use the happy face curve for now. Now I'm going to be linking what I'll be illustrating with concepts from another chapter, your graph drawing. So you typically learn this in lower secondary, and this is the chapter where you substitute various x values into an equation to draw out your quadratic curve with your curve ruler. So at this stage, it would be nice if you could draw this curve out on a graph paper and have that in front of you, right? Because it will give you a better sense of what I'm going to be explaining. Oh, and also a quick tip to students who are not very good at curve drawing. So whenever you're required to draw or even sketch a graph, of course, if the question already gives you the range, use it, right? But if not, and you're required to choose your own, I recommend using the range from -3 to 3. Reason being, if your curve has a y-intercept, it will show up nicely and you'll get some positive as well as some negative values as well. Alright, but if you are lazy to draw the graph, like most students will be, just take what I have here as the graph that you have drew. And maybe in your free time, you can just draw this out to see for yourself. Anyways, after drawing out the curve, I would like to bring your attention to areas where the quadratic curve intersects the x-axis. These points over here. These points are commonly thought to be your solutions of your curve, and sometimes referred to as roots as well. Typically at lower sec, you'll be taught that after drawing the quadratic curve on a graph paper, if they ask you for the solution, you can just read off the x-coordinates at these intersections and there's your answer. Now, would you believe me if I were to tell you that those x-coordinates are also the values of x that you will obtain if you solve the quadratic equation? Meaning to say, if you were to take this quadratic equation and solve for the value of x, you will get these values as your answers for x. Now, if you don't believe, you can try it, right? Take out your calculator, put in these values, or even use the formula (-b plus minus square root b squared minus 4ac over 2a) to solve for x. Right? What you will see is that the x-coordinates of the points that I've circled, this intersection between the curve and the x-axis, is indeed your solution of x. So for those of you who have already diligently drew out the quadratic curve on a graph paper, you can just read off the x-coordinates and you will know this is true. Now, why is that so? This is because when you start out in secondary 1, learning about your factorization techniques, your cross method to solve quadratic equations, before finally realizing that you can just easily solve a quadratic equation by using your calculator. And then at Sec 2, learning that there are two types of quadratic curves, your happy face curve, your sad face curve, and then how to use a curve ruler to draw these curves on a graph paper. The problem here is that you've been learning these chapters and concepts in isolation, when in fact, quadratic curves quadratic equations, graphing, and later on when I link back to discriminant, are chapters where the concepts are very much connected. So much so that I will go ahead to add graphing as one of the ways to solve quadratic equation. And that's usually what I teach my students in tuition, right? That there are 4 ways to solve a quadratic equation. It's just that it's way too tedious to draw a graph each time you want to solve a quadratic equation because it takes too much time. But that doesn't change the fact that graphing can be used to solve a quadratic equation. And the reason why graphing is a way to solve a quadratic equation is because if you look at your quadratic equation before you put into your calculator, right, isn't this the curve that you drew? The y equals to x squared plus x minus 2, right? And when you equate it to 0, graphically, it means this. So you have drew your curve, and y equals to 0 basically means a horizontal line. The x-axis, right, to be precise. So you have your curve on graph paper, and when you read off these x coordinates, what you're reading is actually the intersection between the curve and the line. Which, if you put the equation of the curve and the line together and you solve for the value of x using your calculator, in a layman way, what you're doing when solving this mathematically is unknowingly the same as the graphical method of solving. Except that instead of manually looking at the graph, you're telling the calculator, right, find the intersection for me. And so it will give you the same answer. Now, at this stage, after understanding this, you will ask me, how does all of this relate to discriminant? Well, discriminant is basically a way to examine how a curve and a line will meet. Hence, all the concepts that I just mentioned from quadratic equation, graphing, while it may be basic, it's important that I lay it out for you first before explaining in the next video how they will all fit nicely together with concepts from discriminant. So, do check out part 2 of the chapter when it's out, as I'll be delivering the links between quadratic equation, graphing, and discriminant, as well as elaborating on the 3 scenarios. Alright, thanks for clicking onto this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you, and have a great day ahead.